Vice President and Director of Athletics, Kortne Gosha.
So this is the first time I get to do this, but any Rattlers in the house? Yeah! No. I said any Rattlers in the house? Yeah! All right, we're excited to be here, folks. To Dr. Robinson, to our trustees, Coach Simmons, Mayor Pro Tem, President Clark, and the voice. I appreciate the opportunity to serve this university.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown with Athletic Director U. I am pleased to be joined by Kortne Gosha. Kortne is the Vice President and Director of Athletics at Florida A&M University. Greetings, Kortne. Thanks for joining us.
Greetings, Ty. It's a pleasure to be here and certainly excited to share some of the great things that are happening at Florida A&M.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I want to talk to you today. I have you on. You've been in the chair since, I believe, November or December of 2019. So it's roughly a year, almost a year and a half kind of situation. A whole bunch of things have happened in that year and a half. And the bigger conversation I want to have is being effective in that first year to year and a half in the chair, in the first stint in the chair, really, as an athletics director. And I think some of the things you have done are worthy of having a discussion about it here on Athletic Director U. A little bit about your background. You spent time at University of Miami, spent time at Middle Tennessee State, Jacksonville State, and you've been in the industry for about a decade. So you've accomplished a lot in that time. And I guess right off the bat, when you talk about 10 years in the industry and you talk about some of the positions you've been in operations and facilities and the experience you get, we've all heard ADs say that you can prepare all you want to be an athletics director, right? But when you're in a chair for the first time, you're learning as you go. I wonder about your experience with that concept of we all want to be there. And once you get there, it's like you're trying to catch a moving train kind of situation. Talk to us a little bit about that.
No, so you're absolutely right. There was a time in my career where I worked very closely with my athletic director at the time. And, you say, hey, I can do that, or I might even do this better. But you truly don't understand, what it requires of you from a leadership perspective until you sit in the chair. For me, like most of my career, my beginning of my tenure as an athletics director didn't start off in a traditional manner. 3 months in, you're facing a global pandemic that has really changed our industry as we knew it at one time. And so trying to navigate those circumstances on top of the ones that you inherited, it required me to really change the way that I lead and manage and operate as an athletics director, to understand that I have to listen more than I speak, and understanding how to establish culture. Because when you already have challenges, and then quite frankly, a new one that is one that doesn't have a blueprint for anyone. So as you pick up the phone and you call your mentors in the industry, we're all kind of building this plane as we flew it, as it pertains to COVID-19. And so you had to really understand and determine what issues that you address, in the beginning. I'm very excited about our approach once I was announced as athletic director, and it was very aggressive to get out and get some early wins, to create engagement with donors and alumni, that quite frankly in those first 3 months, because we did that, yielded significant fruit to us during the pandemic, where there's identification between your base and your leadership, which is something that at Florida A&M had not happened prior to. And so, again, I think in your first year, as you're named an athletic director or aspire to do so, be intentional. You be intentional about the connections and the relationships that you forge, not only with your base, but with your mentors and with people in the industry. And I think that was very beneficial for us before the pandemic, and certainly
Right.
were an asset in the pandemic.
I still want to focus a little bit on this learning as a leader when you get into your first, I guess, big leadership position. Exponentially, I think, when you're on a job, even in the 2 months before the pandemic, you have to kind of reassess what you thought you knew about leadership. This is what I imagine happens, right? I mean, I've never been an athletics director, but I think there's some reassessment and introspection going on in those first 2 months because things are coming at you I wonder about like challenges right off the bat. And you're the decision maker, right? The person you report to, you have to explain why you made those decisions, but you are the decision maker, and the people around you are just giving you suggestions. Talk to us a little bit about that when you have to make those decisions that are probably the best for the organization as a whole, right? But they're challenging decisions because there might be people around you who think you could have went in a different direction.
Absolutely. So, I would say that, when you inherit a situation or a circumstance in a new leadership role, it's very important that you really take things slow, to really unpack what issues need to be addressed first. In particular, it was a staff assessment, understanding why some of the challenges within the organization existed. And so you're assessing staff. You're also looking at the opportunities because when you accept a new job, you already have a strategy to some degree in hand, but you also have to understand how you can kind of speak the same work language to your boss, who may not understand your methodology as you're implementing new things, but then also understanding the current culture within the organization and how you affect positive change with moving the organization in the direction that you see fit. And so leadership is not always about my vision. It's about the collective vision. And so we do that with collaboration, understanding all stakeholders, not only just your employees, but those who are invested in your program. And reverting back to your experiences in the industry, people talk about my why. I started off in the industry as an equipment manager, which at most organizations is kind of an outlier, a low-level employee. But I learned a lot about people in those experiences, how to connect with people, how to connect with student athletes. And you may hear the things that the coach will never hear or the AD will never hear, and find common ground to bridge the gaps in those communications. And so reverting back to those experiences as an equipment manager, and as I've ascended administratively in the industry, applying those practices. One of the very first groups that I met with were my student athletes. It was important to me that they knew who the athletic director was. This coach said, think big, right? The better team lost today. That's all right. We're going to build on it. So keep doing what you're doing. I was happy to see you guys compete. We know what a struggle it's been to compete this year, right? But we know what our goal is. So championships, all right? So let's keep working. And then I wasn't a guy that they weren't going to see, every blue moon, that I'm going to show up to practices. I need to know what's going on in your life. And in particular here at Florida A&M, those things had not happened. And so the culture shock was that the AD is at a practice, or the AD knows my name, or the AD is at a community event. And so that's how you start the momentum, the shift, the buy-in of cultural change.
Yeah, that's important. And some of the things you said there, it's interesting to me, right? We talked before it was announced that you were the athletics director. We talked on the phone. You were looking for different people who may have had a similar experience as yours in terms of, fundraising at an HBCU, a number of those things. And what's interesting to hear you talk is that you hear a lot of those type of words coming from athletic directors we've talked to here on Athletic Director U or over on the One Question Leadership podcast. And it's interesting because when you're not in the chair, those things sound like, man, they're just political speech. This is things you always hear AD say. But when you get in the chair, you understand what they mean, like culture, listening to the people around you, collaborative decisions, and all those things that are important when you get into a leadership role. So I find it interesting. One of the things we did talk about when you took that job, in terms of Florida A&M, here's a school with a historic tradition of success going all the way back to Jake Gaither and a number of different individuals who had come through the school, but it has some recent challenges living up to that historic tradition of success, even over the past probably decade and a half. So one of the first questions I asked when we talked on the phone before it was announced that you were the AD was, are they serious about athletics? Are they going to give you the resources you need? And can you be successful at Florida A&M? And I think your response was, maybe not verbatim, was something like, this is what they told me. All I can do is take their word and we'll go and try to make it happen to find success. And so you've done some of that. And I want to ask you about, listening to what is promised and what you promise before you get the job, and then coming into the job, and that relationship between the two parties, you and the institution, whether it be the president, the chancellor, board of trustees, or whatever. Talk to us a little bit about that dynamic prior to getting the job, almost like not necessarily during the interview period, but as things look like they were actually going to happen when you get the job, and then coming in and hitting the ground running with those promises between the two parties in terms of taking the job as an athletics director.
So, it's really a unique, I guess you could say, experience. And I revert back to some of my prior experiences, and Blake James, who was my former boss, and we had this conversation about what could be. And he said, Kortne, I think you have the ability to see what other people can't. And so when we looked at Florida A&M and this opportunity in particular, it was about seeing what other people couldn't, and being able to cast a vision that the president, that our trustees, that all of our stakeholders could believe in, one that was deliverable from an athletics director. Was it going to be tough work? Absolutely. So when you talk about strategy, it's about the alignment that you have on the vision. Then my job as the athletics director is to ensure that those visions and those promises that were made, from my perspective, are executed at a high level to enhance the student athlete experience. And obviously my president and all of my stakeholders were committed to providing a transformational student athlete experience. And, part of that, from a leadership perspective, there are details that have to be flushed out. There are circumstances that certainly make articulating a vision difficult at times. However, the buy-in at the top is really where it starts. And when you accept a job, or quite frankly for me, those are the selling points to say, hey, this is the place. And the trajectory, quite frankly, I encourage more of our leaders within this industry, young, old, to take a closer look at what's happening at historically Black colleges and universities in particular, because we need more transformational leaders in the space to do things that, quite frankly, a lot of people can't see or once thought was impossible at historically Black colleges and universities. The student athlete experience here, I quite frankly, and I've seen it at the highest levels, second to none. And so that commitment to excellence, that commitment to the traditions that you mentioned earlier, was what we were intrinsically invested in bringing back. When you talk about the reputation of this great institution, we're an institution of first. You look at you mentioned Coach Jake Gaither and what he's done for what we know as college football today. We talk about Althea Gibson, who transformed tennis for so many minorities. There would be no Serena Williams if it wasn't for an Althea Gibson, et cetera, et cetera. And so it's simply what we tell our recruits. All of your dreams can come true here at Florida A&M.
There at Florida A&M, you've accomplished a number of milestones, a number of things since taking over. And I want to walk through some of those. And if you can give us the thought process and strategy behind it, because of course here at Athletic Director U, when we put out information, and we want it to be learning and educational for everybody watching, listening, reading, whatever it is, right? Future ADs, current ADs, et cetera. Like you said, when you started off the bat, obviously you come in and you listen to people, and you were making an assessment about the people around you. And in making that assessment, you have to make moves, right? You got to hire, you may have to let some people go. You're talking about coaches and you talk about staff. You immediately just started bringing people in after making a quick assessment, people around you who, from what it looks like from a year and a half later, they have helped you propel the university to an excellent position right now in college athletics. Talk to us a little bit about your hiring, coaches and staff strategy and process when you took the job.
Absolutely. One of the things that's really unique, and I really put a lot of time into strategizing on the individuals that we would bring to the institution. We knew, what I did know is at the time I had a staff and only one person had worked in intercollegiate athletics before Florida A&M. And so I knew that we had to move, some people's seat on the bus. And so very strategically, I knew at the time I would be the youngest Division I athletics director in the country. That's in some categories good, some categories bad. And so I needed an administration who could be innovative and progressive, but also keep me as the leader of the department rooted. We knew we would have challenges and circumstances. And so one of the very first hires, which was a colleague of mine in Middle Tennessee in that time, was a guy by the name of Keith McClooney. We hired him as our deputy athletics director. He was a sitting athletics director at University of Arkansas Pine Bluff. He had experience in the HBCU sector. I did not attend an HBCU, had not worked at one prior to. And so I needed someone who had the understanding of that landscape. During my time at Miami, Miss Correa Lockley, who was in our business office there at the University of Miami and really worked with me on a lot of large-scale capital projects, but certainly kept us rooted and on track. It was important that I had someone who could manage the financial turmoil that we were in. We inherited a $2.4 million deficit. We were able to balance that deficit in lieu of the pandemic, and on track to deliver a balanced budget for the second time in almost a decade for Florida A&M athletics. And her experiences as an undergrad at Hampton, but also she's worked at a mid-major. She's worked at a Power 5 institution and understands the methodology behind those practices. Hiring Kevin Wilson, to lead our external unit from Washington State, another person who has very extensive experience in college athletics from Central Florida, Duke, North Carolina Central, and all of those type things. And then Mr. Michael Johnson, who our paths had crossed at Middle Tennessee as well, but someone who was really young and innovative in the space and a rising star, who quite frankly, I attribute a lot of our brand elevation to, and being able to push the envelope. And so understanding that you're giving people who may not necessarily have the qualifications on paper, but are ready for the opportunity. And if you look at my track record, totally untraditional, Chris Massaro, my athletic director at Middle Tennessee, gave me an opportunity to elevate myself from an equipment manager to an associate athletic director, and really be in the driver's seat of a lot of game-changing opportunity. It wasn't because I was the most qualified, but quite frankly, he realized and recognized that the energy was there. And so that's one thing that I firmly believed in as I've ascended is it's not about the qualifications all the time. It's about, the ability to connect and align with people, cast a vision and be able to execute it. And so that was important to me when you're talking about assembling a staff who can understand what they're going into, who can understand how to work through the challenges, and deliver a transformational experience.
Yeah, which is important. Thinking about the people you named and the positions you named coming into it, I wonder if you obviously have an idea who you want to bring in, but then you also have to make an assessment of the positions that are necessary for the organization to be successful. So you talk about hiring people who weren't qualified, but then you also had to create these positions that they were going to have to be successful at because you've given them the charge and given them a position, sink or swim, let's make it happen. So talk about that assessment of the people you want, but then you also know there are some crucial positions that need to be filled too, right? When you talk about getting people on the bus and then and then making sure they're in the right seats, you also got to know what seats are available too. So that there's a balance there, right? Give us a little insight on that balance.
There is, and I tell our staff this: purpose has a pace. And so understanding what's important now. What does the organization need to be successful? Early on, we said that academics and compliance were going to be the offense and defense of our administration. We were serious about that. We had some academic and compliance issues, but we also understood that historically the athletic director and/or the department had never really had an external engagement. We had never raised monies for ourselves. We didn't have an annual fund. And quite frankly, there was no access to the AD. And so I knew early on that I was going to have to make myself available to constituents, big or small, kind of having the common touch. But I needed a staff that back of house can ensure that these things are happening in a proper way, that we're operating in compliance, that we're putting academics at the forefront, that we have external engagement, that again we're being financial stewards of our resources, and so that was key. And you talk about being able to have interaction and management with coaches, as sport administrators. All of those individuals that I mentioned are sport administrators. There's constant communication between the coaches, even some of the student athletes, that flow through our sport administrators to the athletic director, who may not necessarily always be available. And so, again, it goes back to creating that culture. We have a saying, and we call it the FAMULI, because we're serious about that. To create a culture where there's buy-in, where there's trust, our sport administrators, our student athletes operate in that type of capacity where we're open and transparent.
Everything you said is interesting. I do want to pick up on one thing though: purpose with a pace, and you kind of said that in as you were talking about creating that external department. When you talk about raising money, one of the things you created there was the Rattler Athletic Fund, right? You also partnered that with Cash App, right, which is pretty innovative in itself. Talk about purpose with a pace, and then talk about how that relates to creating an actual athletic fund so we can actually have the resources to be a successful athletics department.
Absolutely. Being at a historically Black college or university, we're a lower resource institution. However, at Florida A&M, there is a lot of opportunity. We were very draconian in our processes of chasing paper checks and things of that nature. But we do graduate high earners, high achievers. And so to establish that reconnection back to athletics, which is the front porch of our campus, we were very innovative. We actually launched an app called HBCU Change. We're the first school to do that. And essentially, it's just like some of your apps, you link your card and it rounds up the change and it comes directly to FAMU athletics. We also launched the Rattler Athletic Fund, which was the philanthropic arm of FAMU athletics. For so long, people were giving money but didn't really know where it was going or how it was being applied. And so we were very ambitious. We knew we had to make some significant changes to facilities. Our football field house, there had been nothing structurally or renovations done for over 30 years. And so imagine trying to recruit today's student athlete to that. And so we were very intentional. In year one of the Rattler Athletic Fund, we exceeded our annual goal of $750,000. And now we've kind of launched year two. And so giving people the confidence and the alignment to understand how they can be engaged with your organization was key.
All right. What's interesting in what you said there is, we've always heard that people who have graduated from HBCUs don't give back to HBCUs, right? But it sounds like what you did was, let's change the method of doing it, right? Let's open up the highway so people can go down the street. Basically, let's create a way for people to actually give so we don't wait for, like what you said, the draconian method of people to send in a check. Now they can give almost indirectly, right? Knowing that they're giving, but not necessarily have to worry about how much they're taking out their bank account and all those things, in addition to the people who actually are going to send in a check and those types of things. So there's some inherent genius in that, I think, is taking away the obstacles so people can actually give. There are a few other things I want to talk to you about that you've done since being there. I mean, when you look through the D1 ticker list and sort Gosha, I mean, there's just a number of different headlines you're reading, right? Another one is there was an infractions case, right? You come in and, from the outside looking in, you're like, I wonder if you knew about that before you took the job. But so you come in and you got to deal with this, and you got to calm the waters, right? You said compliance is either offense or defense, right? Academics and compliance. So this is something that you got to attack. Talk to me about, not specifics about the case, but about your approach to handling a situation like that when it comes up and you're in a chair, not long in the chair, but this is something you got to deal with.
So you're absolutely right. And it was a situation that I was prepped on by the president before, obviously being appointed, had did some extensive research. A lot of my, prior contacts, in the industry came into the equation because I really needed to understand methodology. I don't have a compliance background, and that wasn't my strong suit. But to be able to walk through the challenges, to understand why we arrived where we were, and then, quite frankly, what the best path to move forward would be. And I knew very quickly that we had to really beef up our compliance unit. We did that. And then understanding that as the athletics director, small staff, you talk about going back to that family atmosphere. I have to be involved with our programs, especially our revenue generating programs, to one, provide stability that attributed to some of these infractions. Historically, there was a lot of turnover at Florida A&M. And so when there's a high level of turnover and there's not a really good base of continuity, things happen. And so understanding and articulating to my president, this is why strategic plans matter. This is why it requires buy-in top down, because it will affect the student athlete experience. And quite frankly, it will affect our bottom line because there are penalties associated with those things. And so if we want to change the narrative, if we want to do something different, because there's no secret that historically black colleges and universities are riddled with NCAA infractions and penalties and things of that nature because of some of those things. But we've been committed to, again, changing that narrative, putting in best practices and understanding what best practices are. So you talked earlier about sound bites, athletic directors who talk about culture and how we're going to do those things. I made it very clear to our staff and to our leadership team that we can't be soundbite administrators and soundbite leaders. We actually have to do the work, put in the best practices and put the processes in place to ensure, our overall success.
Right. Yeah, what's interesting is you said if you don't have a strategic plan and one that could actually be executed on, it affects the student athlete experience and it affects athletics as a whole. And really, for some schools, it affects their reputation, right, nationally, right, which FAM has had some hits on its reputation over the last, 10 to 15 years, like I mentioned right in the beginning. And so when you come in and you establish these things, it's almost like, why go somewhere if there's not a problem to solve, right? And so you come in and you establish these things and you make these decisions to strategically, first and foremost, help out to make sure that student athletes have a great student athlete experience. B, talk about making sure athletics is a valid representation of enhancing the mission of the academic mission of the university. And then C, the reputation of the school in general. When you talk about athletics and we talk about the people use the term the window for the front porch of the university when you talk about college athletics. So you've done a number of those things. I think you've done them well. And I want to look at a couple other things. Obviously, you had to make some tough COVID decisions. But one of the decisions you've made, and other schools have made similar decisions when you talk about HBCUs, is moving conferences. And moving conferences can be a big thing, and sometimes it can just be something that happens. But when schools like Florida A&M move conferences, sometimes it's a major situation. Hampton did it a little while ago. Talk to us a little bit about that decision, coming into that, and how that fit into the strategic plan that you created when you started out there.
Absolutely. As you talk about the resource game, as I call it, and every athletic director around the country is playing the resource game. And so for us, we had to do an evaluation of where are some of our weaknesses and opportunities in our space. And for us, the footprint of our current conference, the MEAC, was a very large footprint. I'd heard horror stories of our baseball team having to jump on a bus, travel 17 hours to Delaware and play a series and come back. And that's not a quality student athlete experience. In addition to that, the financial cost, just became really unattainable, which were one of the circumstances that had created some of our past financial challenges. And so we were really aggressive. I did not really understand or realize if there would be conferences that were really interested in us because of some of our past history. And so we went to work on that immediately. We did a feasibility study to understand the financials, to understand what conferences where there might be opportunities. We presented that to our board, and the economics were clear for us. And so being able to pour those resources back into our program to enhance the student athlete experience was really the core driver for our decision to leave the MEAC and enter into the Southwestern Athletic Conference. The geography made all the difference. But for us, as an HBCU, it was important to keep our identity. You talk about the diverse and inclusive nature of HBCUs. It was important that we maintain that and played peers that really match with our institutional profile from an academic perspective, but also an athletic perspective. And so the timing couldn't have been worse because we were in the middle of a global pandemic, and where our focus from a leadership perspective is so right now driven to the task at hand. Most people are like, I don't know if the timing's right. But for us, my vision, and at the time, and our team's vision was post-COVID, we have to be as strong as we possibly can. We have to position ourselves to be ready. And obviously, that was driven based off of cost, expenditures, but then the opportunities for our student athletes. When I inherited the job, several programs were eliminated. That's probably one of the harder things that I've had to do in my athletic tenure, is to look a student athlete in the face because their experience was cut short. And so this decision for us was really guided in being able to provide a world-class experience, being able to afford that, but then also understanding that the timing probably would never be perfect for conference realignment.
Right.
But the time was now.
Now that I do want to talk to you. There's a couple interesting things that happened over the past year that I think would be interesting for people watching or listening to hear about. Now, in October 2020, you announced a deal with Adidas, which had to take some strategic planning in itself, right? Which was a major accomplishment for Florida A&M University. And then fast forward to March 2021, you announced a deal with Nike. LeBron James is involved in a number of things involved with that, with apparel. Talk to us about those decisions and how they came about and what the takeaways are for somebody who's in an athletic director chair, or who actually would want to be an athletic director.
So, I would say, now's a time where leadership in our country, in our industry, is needed more than ever. And in leadership roles, you need partners. You need partners who understand what you're trying to do. That's from a cultural perspective, that's from the student athlete experience, and from a leadership perspective. And so we talked about the segue from the MEAC to the SWAC. Because we were leaving athletic conferences, we had the opportunity now to really engage in our own apparel agreement, which I've done before. I've done some deals at Middle Tennessee and Jacksonville State. And so we engaged, our current apparel provider, which was Nike and Adidas. And because the world was really upside down at that time, and, it's not a great time for negotiations, and especially asking for people to raise the stakes. And at the time we thought we were at a place with apparel provider Adidas, and we had, taken some steps to move that forward. However, one of the things that you'll learn, in this space, things can happen. In our industry, we play sports. There's always this thing called sudden change, and I tell our associate ADs all the time, we get paid to hit the curveball. And obviously the incumbent, our Nike company, who was the incumbent, had the opportunity to exercise their first right of refusal. And I was very clear, in those conversations that whomever we engage in a relationship with, we need to do something that is transformational for Florida A&M, but also sends a greater signal about raising the stakes in equity and inclusion and diversity. We talked about the sound bites, and there's been a lot of people in our industry who say, hey, I'm committed to being diverse and inclusive, and we want to support the change. Okay, so show us, take the actionable steps. Let's talk about the equity gap, and then let's put in things to close it. And so we cast a very very big vision for our partners, and obviously we landed with apparel giant Nike, and we were able to do something that hasn't been done at an institution at this level, and at an institution of our makeup. And we took some significant steps to do something that was transformational for our student athlete experience. And so we're really excited about that partnership and what it's going to do for our brand. But again, I certainly believe that it raised the stakes for others in that space, to say, if we're committed to this, let's do it. And let's do it in a fashion that it hasn't been done before.
Which is excellent. And that deal came about not long after you executed the deal with Adidas. And I don't need to know exactly about the conversation you had with Adidas, but I would like to know about keeping up relationships when you make that type of decision to come out of something to go with, I guess, for lack of a better word, a competitor. Just keeping up the relationship with people, because as you know, in this business, relationships matter. Talk about that aspect with the folks over at Adidas when you made that switch.
Relationships are key. In our engagement with all people who are interested in Florida A&M, the relationships were at the forefront. We understood that we had to do something that was transformational for our student athletes, and we wanted to align with a partner who was holistic in that, who understood that this deal was about the culture. It was about doing something that had not been done before. All stakeholders that were at the table, again, were committed to that. And however, obviously, at the end of the day, we made a decision that was in the best interest of Florida A&M. And those relationships on the other side are still intact. First class organization. And again, that is part of the leadership conversation. As we talk about the gross need for leadership at high levels within our industry, even though that opportunity didn't happen today, we don't know what bridges we're gonna cross in the future. And so it was very important that we manage those delicately, and gave everyone an opportunity to be fair to all sides, but also to deliver what we were there to accomplish.
Yeah, actually, yeah, and that goes for on a personal and professional level, right? I wonder about the deal with Nike and the conversations and making it happen. You want those conversations to be direct. Like, hey, there are things happening in the world that if we can put something like this together, it looks good for everybody involved. Beyond Nike, beyond Florida A&M, but thinking about HBCUs and the country as a whole. When you talk about an industry that has supported college athletics for a long time. So I wonder about the, conversation is delicate, but there also has to be some direct conversations coming from someone like you in the position you are in at Florida A&M.
Absolutely. And I'll say that the conversations were very direct. I think we're in a day and age, and especially as a millennial administrator, and I joke a lot of times because I say millennials are about that action. We just are. But
Right.
again, to push the envelope, it was about fighting for our student athletes and doing something that hadn't happened before.
LeBron 18, that's all, man. You got a Rattler at the top. Y'all look inside. Y'all see that? All right, so.
Florida A&M University is an institution of first. We've broken barriers in our industry and in what we do in so many categories. It was time to bring that tradition back to FAMU athletics. And so those conversations were very direct. They were genuine, and they reached the highest levels of that organization. And quite frankly, there's been a commitment to, again, raise the stakes. You talk about leveraging the conversations that we're having around diversity, inclusion, equity. It's important. And what the vision for both parties in this conversation was, which is how the deal came to fruition, was about raising the stakes for everyone. Florida A&M will be the blueprint, for brand elevation, for diversity, inclusion, not just for HBCUs. We're talking about for all of intercollegiate athletics. We firmly believe that through this partnership that we will be that blueprint to provide a very diverse, transformational student athlete experience.
Yeah, which will be excellent. Excellent. You talk about purpose with a pace. I'll ask this final question, then we'll wrap. In the compendium or the comprehensive volume of our experiences in life, they guide us as we make decisions, and those decisions affect whether we're celebrating or we are dealing with a challenge. You've talked about a number of them that you've discussed so far, but I wonder about the comprehensive volume of your career and of your life and how they guide you, right? Purpose with a pace while you're at Florida A&M, but in terms of personal values of personal purpose and how those things blend in the position you are, the vice president and director of athletics at Florida A&M University.
So understanding your core values, that those are non-negotiables. Being genuine in what you do, who you interact with, understanding that you do have a job to carry out. But the dedication to your institution and where you are couldn't be more important right now. For me, Florida A&M University, which just so happens to be an HBCU, they afforded Kortne Gosha an opportunity to be an athletics director that, quite frankly, probably wouldn't have happened if it wasn't for an HBCU. And so in all of the challenge and all of the circumstances that I knew I would inherit, that is the motivation to make sure that we're providing transformational leadership that's going to take the department to new places. We talk about the Nike deal and the impact that it will have. We talk about the $10 million grant to renovate a stadium that otherwise would have been condemned. You talk about implementing strategic plans that has revenue generation goals that haven't been achieved at this institution. And so as we talk about being an institution of first, it was really important as we are building kind of our leadership traits and using our core values to take the organization to new places, that we kept that tradition of being first and to continue to blaze a trail, not only for Florida A&M athletics, but for others. And we are firmly committed to being the blueprint and continuing to contribute to our industry in a positive way. It's all about y'all, man. At the end of the day, we talked about it, right? Coach Preach, think big, right? And there's some big things that are going to happen in this program. Wouldn't have happened without y'all, right? And so you did everything the right way. But I'm so proud of you guys and everything that you've done on the court and off the court. But this is just the beginning. So keep doing the good things in the classroom, on the court. Our time's coming.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, being the blueprint. You've done a number of things, Kortne, and I think Florida A&M University is very appreciative to have you there because of the direction you have taken the school and where it's going. And other HBCUs and college athletics in general should be happy that a person like you is in a leadership position that you're in. I really appreciate you joining us here on Athletic Director U.
Thanks, Ty. I appreciate it and look forward to the next opportunity.
Yes, sir. That was Kortne Gosha. He is the Vice President and Director of Athletics at Florida A&M University. And of course, I am Ty Brown with Athletic Director U. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today.